Sir, I need to see your identification and proof of citizenship. You're suspected of using fraudulent veteran benefits. Sir, please cooperate.
Officer, I fought for this country. I have a VA card and an ID. And sir, what crime am I accused of?
Where were you born? Are you here legally? The question was directed at an 89-year-old man standing outside a post office in Baltimore, Maryland, holding a package containing medication he was mailing to his granddaughter in Atlanta. He'd served in the United States Marine Corps during the Korean War. He'd earned a Purple Heart after taking shrapnel during the Battle of Chosin Reservoir. He'd survived combat in temperatures 40 degrees below zero, watched friends freeze to death, and came home to a segregated country that treated him like a second-class citizen despite his service. Now, on a Tuesday afternoon in October 2023, an Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent was questioning his right to be in America. The post office's exterior security camera captured everything. The initial approach, the demand for documentation, the escalation when credentials were dismissed. The moment an 89-year-old combat veteran was handcuffed outside a federal building for the offense of mailing a package while black. What started as an anonymous complaint about a suspicious elderly foreign male at the post office would end with a $14.2 million verdict that exposed how service to country meant nothing when federal agents decided someone didn't look American enough. Before we continue, if this is your first time watching, hit that subscribe button. Stories like these need to be documented. Your support helps ensure these cases reach the people who need to see them. James Mitchell had spent 89 years proving he belonged. The question was whether America would ever stop asking. Tuesday, October 17, 2023. 2:18 p.m. outside the United States Post Office on North Charles Street in Baltimore, Maryland. The afternoon was cool, temperature 54 degrees, overcast sky threatening rain. The post office parking lot was moderately busy with people coming and going, conducting routine postal business on a weekday afternoon. James Mitchell stood near the entrance, holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. He wore dark slacks, a button-down shirt, and a jacket bearing a Korean War Veterans Association patch on the left breast. A baseball cap with USMC veteran, embroidered across the front, covered his gray hair. He walked slowly, using a cane for balance, his gait affected by age and old injuries. He'd just mailed the package containing prescription arthritis medication to his granddaughter who couldn't afford her own. The transaction had taken 8 minutes. He was walking back to his car, parked in a handicapped space near the building entrance, when the black SUV pulled into the lot. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Special Agent Robert Chin, 32 years old, 5 years with the agency, emerged from the vehicle. He wore tactical pants, a polo shirt with an ICE badge embroidered on the chest, and a duty belt carrying handcuffs, pepper spray, and a service weapon. His body camera activated as he stepped out, recording timestamp and location data. Chun approached with purposeful strides, closing the distance to James quickly. The post office security camera, mounted above the entrance, captured both men clearly. The angle showed James's face, his veteran cap, his cane, and Chen's approach from behind. "Excuse me, sir," Chun said, his voice carrying authority that expected immediate compliance. "I need to speak with you." James turned slowly, his movement deliberate due to age and physical limitation. He looked at Chun with an expression of mild confusion. "Can I help you?" James asked, his voice rough from age but steady. Chun stopped 6 feet away, his posture aggressive despite the distance. "I'm a federal agent with Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I need to ask you some questions about your immigration status." The words settled over the parking lot like a physical weight. James's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. "My immigration status?" James repeated. "Son, I'm 89 years old. I was born in this country. What's this about?" Chun pulled out a notepad, consulting notes written before arriving. "We've received information that you may not be legally present in the United States. I need documentation proving your citizenship or legal status." James stared at him. 89 years of experience with discrimination, with being questioned, with being treated as less than American despite his service, crystallized in that moment. But his voice remained calm, controlled by decades of military discipline and survival. "I'm a United States Marine Corps veteran," James said. "I served in Korea. I've lived in Baltimore my entire life except for my time in service." "What documentation are you looking for?" The security camera captured Chun stepping closer, narrowing the distance between himself and James to less than 4 feet. His body language was confrontational, his stance wide, his hand resting near his duty belt. "Sir, I need to see a passport, birth certificate, or naturalization papers," Chun said. "Do you have any of those documents with you right now?" James shifted his weight on his cane, his knee aching from standing too long. "I don't carry my birth certificate around with me." "Who does?" "I have my driver's license and my VA card in my wallet." "Will that work?" "No, sir," Chen said flatly. "Those documents don't prove citizenship or legal presence. I need original government documents." James felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the same feeling he'd had during artillery barrages in Korea when there was nowhere to run, nothing to do but endure. He reached for his wallet slowly, extracting his Maryland driver's license and his Department of Veterans Affairs identification card. "James Edward Mitchell," he said, holding out the cards. "Born February 12, 1934 in Baltimore, Maryland. Enlisted in the Marine Corps in 1951. Served in Korea from 1951 to 1953. I've got a Purple Heart at home. I've got my discharge papers in a filing cabinet. What else do you need?" Chun took the cards, glanced at them briefly, and shook his head. "These don't prove legal status. Anyone can get a driver's license. The VA card doesn't verify citizenship." "The VA card means I served in the United States military," James said, his voice rising slightly. "You don't get VA benefits unless you're an American citizen who served. The Marine Corps doesn't take illegal immigrants." "That's not accurate, sir," Chin said. "Foreign nationals can serve in the military under certain circumstances. I need definitive proof of citizenship." The post office security footage captured James's expression changing from disbelief to anger. His jaw tightened. His grip on his cane increased. "I'm 89 years old," James said. "I fought in Korea. I was at Chosin Reservoir when it was 40 below zero. I watched Marines freeze to death. I took shrapnel that's still in my shoulder. I came home to a country that made me use separate bathrooms and drink from separate fountains because I was black. And now you're standing here questioning whether I'm American." A woman exiting the post office stopped, watching the confrontation. She pulled out her phone, starting to record. Chun noticed the witness but didn't acknowledge her. "Sir, I understand you're upset, but I'm conducting an official investigation. I need you to come with me to our field office for verification and processing." "Come with you?" James's voice carried across the parking lot. "I haven't done anything wrong. I mailed a package to my granddaughter. That's not a crime. Refusing to cooperate with a federal officer is obstruction," Chun said. "You can come voluntarily or I can detain you for further investigation. Your choice." "Detain me?" James took a step back, his cane scraping against pavement. "On what grounds? What probable cause do you have?" "We received a credible report that you may be unlawfully present," Chun said. "That's sufficient for investigative detention." "A report from who?" James demanded. "Based on what?" "I'm an old black man mailing a package." "Is that suspicious now?" Chen's hand moved to his handcuffs. "Sir, I'm asking you one more time. Will you come with me voluntarily?" James looked around the parking lot. More people were stopping. More phones were coming out. The woman who'd started recording was narrating into her phone, describing what she was seeing. "I want to know what report you received," James said. "I want to know who called and what they said. Because this is racial profiling and you know it." Chin didn't answer the question. Instead, he reached for James's arm. "Don't touch me," James said, pulling his arm back. The movement was sharp, instinctive, and it caused him to lose his balance slightly. He caught himself with his cane, his bad knee buckling momentarily. Chun interpreted the movement as resistance. His body camera captured what happened next with perfect clarity. He grabbed James's wrist, his grip tight. James tried to pull away, his 89-year-old body no match for a federal agent in his 30s. Chun twisted James's arm behind his back, forcing him to bend forward. "Stop resisting," Chun said loudly, projecting for the growing crowd of witnesses. "I'm not resisting," James gasped. "You're hurting me. My shoulder has shrapnel in it. You're hurting my shoulder." Chun ignored the statement. He reached for his handcuffs with his free hand while maintaining his grip on James's wrist. James's cane fell to the ground, clattering against pavement. The woman recording screamed, "He's 89 years old. He's a veteran. What are you doing?" Other voices joined hers. "Leave him alone. He's not fighting you. Call the police." Chun forced James's other arm behind his back. James cried out, his shoulder joint grinding where shrapnel had left scar tissue and limited mobility. The handcuffs closed around his wrists, metal tight against fragile skin. "You're under arrest for obstructing a federal officer," Chun said. "Arrest?" James's voice broke. "I didn't obstruct anything. I answered your questions. I showed you my ID. What did I do wrong?" Chun didn't answer. He guided James toward the SUV, one hand on the cuffs, the other on James's elbow. James stumbled, his knee giving out without the cane for support. "My cane," James said. "I need my cane. I can't walk without it." "You'll get it back after processing," Chun said, continuing to move him toward the vehicle. The crowd was growing larger. A postal worker came outside, demanding to know what was happening. The woman recording was on the phone now, calling 911. Reporting that ICE was arresting an elderly veteran. A man in his 60s, also wearing a veteran cap, pushed through the crowd. "That's James Mitchell. He's a Korean War veteran. He's been coming to this post office for 40 years. What the hell are you doing?" Chun opened the rear door of the SUV. "Everyone step back. This is federal law enforcement business." "This is wrong," the veteran shouted. "You're arresting a Marine. Purple Heart recipient." "For what?" Chun placed his hand on James's head, guiding him into the back seat. James had to bend awkwardly, his handcuffed wrists making it difficult to balance. He fell into the seat heavily, his shoulder screaming with pain. The door closed. The barrier separated James from the front seat. Chen's body camera, still recording, captured James's reflection in the rearview mirror. Tears streaming down weathered cheeks, breathing hard, disoriented. "I fought for this country," James said to no one, his voice barely audible. "I bled for this flag, and this is how they treat me." Chun got into the driver's seat, keying his radio. "Subject in custody. Transporting to field office for verification." The dispatch response crackled back. "Copy. Status on subject. Elderly male, claiming military service, refused to provide citizenship documentation," Chun said. In the back seat, James closed his eyes. The cold metal of the handcuffs pressed into his wrists. His shoulder throbbed where Chun had twisted his arm. His knee ached from the stumble. And somewhere deeper, in a place physical pain couldn't reach, something else broke. The drive to the ICE field office took 23 minutes. James sat in silence, watching Baltimore pass by through the window. The city where he'd been born. The city where he'd returned after Korea. The city where he'd worked as a postal clerk for 35 years before retiring. The city where he'd raised 3 children and buried his wife. All of it felt foreign now, like he was seeing it from outside, like he didn't belong to it anymore. At the field office, Chun pulled into a secure garage. He came around to the rear door, opening it and helping James out. Without his cane, James could barely stand. He leaned heavily against the vehicle, his knee threatening to give out completely. "I need my cane," James said again. "Please. I can't walk without it." Chun retrieved the cane from the vehicle's trunk where he'd placed it. He handed it to James, who gripped it with shaking hands still cuffed together. They processed him like any other detainee. Fingerprints. Fingers that had pulled triggers in Korea, that had held dying Marines, that had changed his children's diapers and held his wife's hand when she passed. Photos, a mugshot of an 89-year-old decorated combat veteran. Property inventory, his wallet, his keys, his veteran ID cards placed in a plastic bag. "I want to call my son," James said as they finished processing. "I have the right to a phone call." "After verification," Chen said, typing into a computer terminal. Verification of what? James's exhaustion was complete now. "I gave you my name. I gave you my social security number. Run it through your system. It's all there. Everything about me has been documented by the government for 70 years. Chen entered the information. The database response appeared within seconds. James Edward Mitchell, U.S. citizen by birth. Social Security number issued Maryland. 1934. Military service United States Marine Corps, 1951 to 1953. Honorable discharge. Purple Heart recipient. VA benefits recipient since 1953. No criminal record. No immigration violations because he was a natural-born citizen who had served his country in combat. Chun stared at the screen. His face paled. He looked at James, then back at the screen, then at James again. "Mr. Mitchell," Chun said slowly, "there appears to have been an error." An error. The word was inadequate for what had just occurred, and James knew it. James Edward Mitchell wasn't just a veteran. His service record told a story that should have made the anonymous complaint absurd from the first moment. Born February 12, 1934 in Baltimore, Maryland, to a domestic worker and a shipyard laborer. American citizen by birth, descended from ancestors brought to America in chains, who had built this country with unpaid labor, who had fought in every American war since the Revolution despite being denied basic rights. Enlisted in the United States Marine Corps on June 4, 1951 at age 17 with his mother's permission. Too young to vote. Too young to buy alcohol. Old enough to die for his country. Assigned to the 1st Marine Division. Deployed to Korea in September 1951 during some of the war's heaviest fighting. Served as a rifleman, then squad leader, then acting platoon sergeant when casualties created vacancies faster than replacements could arrive. November 1950. The Battle of Chosin Reservoir. Temperatures dropped to 40 degrees below zero. Chinese forces surrounded the Marines. James's unit fought for 17 days in conditions that froze morphine in medic kits, that caused weapons to malfunction, that killed men as surely as bullets. James had carried wounded Marines through snow, had held friends while they died from wounds or cold, had fired his rifle until his fingers froze to the metal, had to be thawed with body heat before he could reload. On the 12th day of the battle, shrapnel from a Chinese mortar round struck his shoulder. 3 pieces of metal embedded in muscle and bone. Field medics couldn't extract them all. 2 pieces remained, setting off metal detectors for the rest of his life. Aching when weather changed, a permanent reminder. The Purple Heart citation was simple. For wounds received in combat against an armed enemy. The medal sat in a display case in his living room, next to his Korean Service Medal, his National Defense Service Medal, and a photograph of him in uniform, 19 years old, trying to look brave. He'd come home in 1953, 20 years old and feeling 50. The Korean War was called a police action, not a war. Veterans weren't celebrated. Parades were minimal. For James, a black Marine returning to Baltimore, it was worse. Segregation was still law. He couldn't eat at certain restaurants, couldn't use certain facilities, couldn't live in certain neighborhoods. The GI Bill helped him get a civil service job with the Postal Service. He'd worked for 35 years, retiring in 1999. Married Eleanor, a school teacher, in 1956. Raised 3 children. Became a grandfather to 7, great-grandfather to 4. Now at 89, he lived alone in the same Baltimore row house he'd bought in 1965. His body carried the marks of war and age. The shoulder that ached constantly. The knee that barely supported his weight. The hearing loss from artillery. The nightmares that still came occasionally. Dreams of frozen mountains and dying Marines. All of it was documented. In military databases. In VA files. In Social Security Administration records. In the very post office where he'd worked for 3 decades. The agent hadn't checked any of it. He'd responded to an anonymous call about an elderly black man and assumed guilt. He'd seen military ID and dismissed it. He'd seen a Purple Heart cap and ignored it. He'd seen an 89-year-old man with a cane and handcuffed him anyway. Chun stood in the processing room, staring at the computer screen that displayed James Mitchell's verified identity. His supervisor, District Field Director Amanda Torres, stood beside him, reading the same information with an expression of mounting horror. "He's 89, Torres said quietly. "He's a Purple Heart recipient. He was at Chosin Reservoir, and you arrested him outside a post office for mailing a package." The anonymous complaint said. Chun started. "I don't care what the anonymous complaint said." Torres cut him off. "Did you verify it before making contact? Did you run his name through databases? Did you check anything?" Chun had no answer. Torres pulled up the anonymous complaint on her terminal. She read it aloud, her voice tight with anger. "Elderly foreign-looking male at post office on North Charles Street. Appears confused and possibly using false identity. May be attempting to access federal services illegally." She looked at Chun. "Foreign-looking. That's your probable cause?" An 89-year-old black man looked foreign to someone. "I followed protocol for immigration verification," Chun said. "You followed nothing," Torres said. "Protocol requires verification before contact. You saw an elderly man with a cane and a veteran cap, and you decided an anonymous racist complaint was more credible than visible evidence." She walked to the holding area where James sat in a plastic chair, his cane resting against his leg, his hands finally free from handcuffs, his wrists red and swollen. "Mr. Mitchell," Torres said, her voice careful. "I'm Amanda Torres, the district director. I want to apologize for this situation. There has been a serious error. You're free to go immediately." James looked at her with exhausted eyes. "An error? That's the second time someone's called it that. It's not an error. It's exactly what it looks like. Racial profiling. I'm an 89-year-old black man and someone decided that made me foreign. And your agent didn't question it for a second." Torres had no response that would make it better. They returned his property, his wallet, his keys, his VA card, everything placed back into his hands that trembled from age and anger and exhaustion. "I want a copy of the anonymous complaint," James said. "I want it in writing, and I want to know what you're going to do about this." Torres printed the complaint. James read it, his hands shaking harder with each word. Foreign-looking, confused, false identity, every word dripping with assumption based solely on his appearance. "I fought in Korea," James said, his voice breaking. "I nearly froze to death at Chosin. I carried wounded Marines through snow. I have shrapnel in my shoulder that will be there when I die. And someone looked at me mailing a package and decided I didn't belong here." He looked at Torres, then at Chun, who couldn't meet his eyes. "I'm 89 years old," James continued. "I don't have many years left. I thought I'd earned the right to live them without being questioned about whether I'm American. I thought service meant something. I thought the Purple Heart meant something. But I was wrong." Torres offered to have someone drive him home. James refused. He called his son, who arrived 40 minutes later, driving through rush-hour traffic with barely controlled fury. James walked out of the ICE field office at 5:47 p.m., 3.5 hours after being detained. His son embraced him in the parking lot, and James broke down completely. "They treated me like I don't belong," James sobbed. "After everything. After Korea. After Chosin. After 50 years at the post office. They handcuffed me like a criminal. But the evidence was already overwhelming. The post office security footage showed everything. The initial contact, the ID rejection, the handcuffing, an 89-year-old man with a cane being forced into custody. The bystander's cell phone video, uploaded to social media within an hour, had been viewed 2 million times. The caption: "ICE arrests Korean War veteran at Baltimore post office. This is America?" Chen's body camera corroborated every detail. The veteran cap clearly visible. James's calm explanation of his service, his offers to provide documentation, the escalation to arrest despite no legal justification. The lawsuit James Edward Mitchell v. United States Department of Homeland Security, Special Agent Robert Chen, was filed in federal court in the District of Maryland 6 weeks after the incident. The complaint was comprehensive and damning. Violation of Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable seizure, false arrest and imprisonment, elder abuse, racial profiling, intentional infliction of emotional distress, violation of rights under color of federal authority. The evidence filled 2 full boxes. Video footage from the post office security system, cell phone recordings from 3 separate witnesses, Chen's body camera footage, medical records documenting James's injuries, bruised wrists from handcuffs, aggravated shoulder injury from having his arms forced behind his back, psychological trauma assessment showing acute stress response, military service records proving every detail of James's identity and service, VA medical files documenting his Purple Heart wound, the shrapnel still embedded in his shoulder, Social Security Administration employment records showing his 35 years as a postal worker. The anonymous complaint itself so transparently based on racial bias it couldn't survive even superficial scrutiny. The government's initial response attempted standard defenses. Qualified immunity for the agent. Argument that Chun was responding to a credible tip. Claim that James's pulling away from Chun constituted resistance justifying arrest. Discovery destroyed those defenses systematically. Chen's deposition was devastating. Did you verify the anonymous complaint before approaching Mr. Mitchell? No. Did you run his name through any databases before making contact? No. Did you see his veteran cap before you demanded citizenship papers? Yes. Did you see his VA identification card? Yes. Did you see he was 89 years old and using a cane? Yes. Did any of those facts cause you to question whether the anonymous complaint might be false? Long pause. I was following protocol for immigration enforcement. What protocol requires handcuffing an 89-year-old Purple Heart recipient for mailing a package? No answer. The case went to trial 11 months after the incident. The federal courthouse in Baltimore was packed daily. Korean War veterans filled the gallery, many in their 80s and 90s, some in wheelchairs. Civil rights organizations, veterans service groups, local and national media. James testified for 2 full days, walking the jury through his life, growing up in segregated Baltimore, enlisting at 17, serving in Korea, chosen reservoir described in detail that left the courtroom silent, the shrapnel wound, coming home to a country that still treated him as less than equal, building a life anyway, retiring from the post office, losing his wife, living quietly until the day ICE decided he looked foreign. I thought I'd paid my dues, he told the jury, his voice thick with emotion. I thought nearly freezing to death in Korea earned me the right to not be questioned. I thought the Purple Heart meant something. I thought 89 years of living here, working here, raising my family here would be enough. But I was wrong. I'm black and that's all some people see. Not the veteran. Not the grandfather. Not the citizen. Just someone who doesn't belong. His son testified about finding his father at the ICE office, about the change in him after the arrest, about the proud Marine who had survived Chosin Reservoir being broken by federal agents in a post office parking lot. Military historians testified about the Battle of Chosin Reservoir, the conditions, the casualties, what Marines endured. Constitutional law experts testified about Fourth Amendment violations so clear they represented textbook examples of unlawful seizure. The video footage played repeatedly in the courtroom. Every angle, every moment. An 89-year-old veteran with a cane being handcuffed, his cane falling to the ground, him being forced into a vehicle while bystanders screamed in protest. The jury deliberated for 7 hours. Their verdict was unanimous on all counts. The damages award sent a message that echoed across federal law enforcement. $14.2 million total. For $0.7 million in compensatory damages for false arrest, emotional distress, physical injury, and violation of constitutional rights. $9.5 million in punitive damages, calculated specifically to punish the callous disregard for James's age, service, and dignity. James sat quietly as the verdict was read, his children on either side of him, Korean War veterans throughout the courtroom standing in respect. When the amount was announced, he didn't celebrate. He nodded once, slowly, a Marine acknowledging mission complete. Chun was terminated within 72 hours. Torres was demoted for failing to ensure proper verification protocols were followed. The supervisor who approved immigration enforcement actions based solely on anonymous complaints was reassigned. The verdict triggered immediate policy changes across immigration and customs enforcement nationwide. Mandatory verification of all anonymous immigration complaints through federal databases before any field contact. Specific protocols for elderly individuals requiring supervisory approval before enforcement action. Requirements to accept military identification as presumptive proof of citizenship status. Training on combat veteran recognition and appropriate respect for military service. Prohibition on enforcement actions at federal facilities including post offices without extraordinary justification. The Department of Homeland Security issued an agency-wide directive. The post office security footage became mandatory viewing in ICE training academies. A case study in how racial profiling and failure to investigate combined to create constitutional violations and massive financial liability. James used a portion of his settlement to establish a scholarship fund for descendants of Korean War veterans. He became a speaker at veterans events and civil rights conferences, not with bitterness but with a steady determination that his experience wouldn't be repeated. The Korean War Veterans Association adopted his case as a national advocacy priority, pushing for federal legislation protecting elderly veterans from immigration enforcement without judicial oversight. The Baltimore Post Office installed a plaque in the lobby, a dedication to James Mitchell and all Korean War veterans who served their country in brutal conditions and came home to fight for equality. The plaque included a photo of James in his Marine Corps uniform at 19, standing beside a current photo at 89. The same person, the same American, finally acknowledged. James returned to his quiet life, forever changed. The settlement provided financial security for his remaining years and ensured his great-grandchildren's education. More importantly, the verdict provided something money couldn't buy: validation. His service mattered. His citizenship was unquestionable. His dignity was legally protected. The cane he'd been using that day, dropped on the pavement when Chun handcuffed him, was returned to him after the trial. He kept it a reminder, not of victimization but of survival. He'd survived Chosin Reservoir. He'd survived segregation. He'd survived being treated as foreign in his own country. And he'd survived to see accountability delivered. James Mitchell's case answered one question with absolute clarity. An anonymous complaint about an elderly black man plus a federal agent who chose not to investigate equals $14.2 million in damages, a terminated career, and policy reforms across an entire agency. But harder questions remain unanswered. How many elderly veterans have been profiled, detained, and humiliated without the strength to fight back? How many anonymous tips driven by racial bias trigger federal enforcement without verification? How many Americans are told to prove their citizenship while standing on soil their ancestors built, defending a flag their family members died for? The security footage still exists. The body camera recordings are still played in training. James Mitchell's testimony is still quoted in civil rights litigation. The evidence is permanent. But evidence requires witnesses willing to care. Juries willing to reject qualified immunity as permission to violate rights. Agencies willing to prioritize investigation over response times. A society willing to decide that military service and 89 years of citizenship mean more than anonymous bias. James gave part of his shoulder to a frozen mountain in Korea, carries that shrapnel still, and federal agents decided it wasn't proof enough that he belonged. The jury gave him $14.2 million because constitutional rights still matter when defended. The question isn't whether federal authority will be abused. The footage proves it will. The question is whether we remain vigilant enough to demand consequences when it is. If you believe Korean War veterans deserve respect, not handcuffs. If you believe Purple Hearts should mean more than anonymous complaints. If you believe 89 years of citizenship shouldn't require further proof, hit that subscribe button. Because accountability demands witnesses, and justice requires people willing to watch, record, and refuse to accept that service means nothing.